Good afternoon. I'd like to call the July 22nd, 2014 City Council meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Francisco? Here. Hart? Here. Hotchkiss? Here. Murillo?
Here.
Rouse? Here. White? Here. Mayor Schneider?
Here. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Just one minor change, and that is we're going to withdraw item number 13, the closed session regarding labor negotiations. We don't need to have it after all today.
So we're going to...
We're going to pull item
Pull it.
13, the closed session regarding labor negotiations.
Right, okay. All right. Public comment. I have a couple of speaker slips here, and we have 2 minutes at the podium. We'll start with William Gentry, to be followed by Lee Moldaver.
Can I start now?
Yes, come up to the podium. You have 2
thank
minutes.
you.
There's a clock right there.
I wasn't expecting such quick gratification.
Yep, there you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here at the suggestion of a city employee downstairs with whom I was just speaking. And the topic of my 2 minutes of fame will be traffic safety in Santa Barbara, specifically bicycle safety. I'm going to be submitting a written report to Marissa Kahn downstairs in risk management. And rather than bend your ears for all the details, what I'd like to do is call your attention to that report, which I'm going to be sending her, and perhaps consider some of the suggestions I have for enhancing traffic safety here in Santa Barbara. That's basically it.
Okay, thank you very much. Lee Moldaver, and then the final speaker will be Tom Becker. We can't, yes, so thank you very much. If you're going to submit your report, and then we'll look to it. Thanks. All right. Mr. Moldaver.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Lee Moldaver, longtime local resident. With regard to bicycle safety, I'm sure we've heard that Santa Barbara has lost one of its most upbeat and distinguished advocates for green transportation and bicycling, Ralph Fertig. And I know everyone who was privileged to work with Ralph at any point in his career misses him tremendously. I also saw several of you last Thursday for Sherry Fisher's retirement, and we miss her. And as we celebrate the great people of the present and the past, I think we're always looking to the future. And that's why I actually wanted to come up here today. Some of you know that this Saturday between 1 and 3, after the cleanup in the morning, the city will be receiving an award at the Karpolis Gallery from the Planning Association. And it's going to be going to one of your administrator's staff, but it's on behalf of all 18 ongoing city green, sustainable, and efficient systems, both within the city and those that you're sharing with the community. And when you have 18 programs that 40 different staff members have been working on year after year, receiving recognition from the Local Governments Commission and the California League of Cities, you can't do an easy photo op asking 40 people to come up. So we've asked on behalf of all 18 programs for Nina Johnson from your staff to come and accept. As you know, she's been the point person in the administrator's office on these issues for many years. It's going to be for 1 to 3 p.m. this Saturday at the Karpolis Gallery upstairs. We hope every member of the council and all interested members of the staff can join us there as our guests. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Tom Becker.
Thank you. Tom Becker, representing Cars Are Basic. A few hours ago, I witnessed the so-called pedestrian crosswalk enforcement at Cali, Colorado, and I videotaped the entire thing on my camcorder. Here's a point that I like to make. I made to you before. The police decoys who are doing this are deliberately and intentionally stepping in front of moving cars to test whether those drivers are going to stop, risking life and limb for this. Now, I asked the decoys and the police officers there if I had permission to ask them questions. They gave permission to me. And I said, isn't it safer to simply wait till there's a gap in the traffic and then go without having to force cars to stop for you? They wouldn't answer that question. Sergeant McGrew, who was operating this sting, threatened to arrest me because I kept asking that question of him to get an answer. That's no way to respond to that kind of question. This is insane for you people in this city government to have a policy where you are showing people, especially children, that it's okay to deliberately and intentionally step in front of a moving car to test whether that driver will stop for you or to assert some kind of right. That's just suicidal. In fact, it's homicidal if you were to kill somebody with that kind of intention. Here's what we need to teach people and children. Look both ways before you cross the street. Do not cross the street, even if you're in a crosswalk. Do not cross the street if there are cars approaching your position. Wait until all the cars are clear, then cross. You people and the PD are teaching children to step in front of moving cars. That's exactly what you're doing. It's wrong, it's suicidal, it's homicidal. Thank you.
Alex Puget will be the final public comment speaker.
Good afternoon. I would like to say a few words about Ralph Fertig, a remarkable community leader that passed away this Friday. Few people know that Ralph studied at Penn State, the University of Michigan, and the Chicago Institute of Design, and had advanced degrees in art, mathematics, and photography before coming to Santa Barbara. In 1991, Ralph joined a group of cyclists to found the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition, and for the next 20 years, he published a monthly newsletter that became the voice of the bicycle community. Ralph Fertig was one of the founders of Grassroots 101, a group that successfully stopped the freeway widening in 1993 and redirected funding to other improvements in the corridor. Ralph, ever thorough with data, patiently reminded all of us that most daily trips are shorter than 2 miles, and in its very essence, all transportation is local. The quality of Ralph's testimony in front of City, County, and SBCAC's boards was legendary. Ralph attended most of the 100-plus hearings that led to the adoption of the city's new circulation element, as well as the city's bicycle and pedestrian master plans. In 1998, Ralph single-handedly brought the National Pro Walk, Pro Bike Conference to Santa Barbara. Ralph was keenly aware of how transportation projects affect environmental quality and social justice. Ralph spoke many times from this very same microphone with an informed, graceful, and above all, respectful manner. So it is fitting to ask all of us to imagine Ralph now riding on Paradise Road with that ever-present smile on his face while we keep a moment of silence in his memory. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public comment. We move on to the consent calendar, and you have some items to read.
Item number 2, adoption of ordinance for 2014 to 2017 Fire Association Memorandum of Understanding. Recommendation that council adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the City of Santa Barbara adopting the 2014 through 2017 Memorandum of Understanding between the City of Santa Barbara and the Santa Barbara City Firefighters Association.
Thank you. Without further objection, we'll waive further reading. There was a public comment speaker slip for item 4. Are there any other items to pull off consent? Okay, if you could read item 4.
County of Santa Barbara Strategic Prevention Framework State Incentive Grant.
Great. Melissa Wilkins?
Hi, my name is Melissa Wilkins. I'm the Prevention Coordinator at the Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse, and I am here today because I've had the opportunity to partner with the Santa Barbara Police Department on this particular project. And I just want to recognize the amazing work of the Santa Barbara Police Department in regards to the enforcement that they do around drinking and driving, period, and the work that they do on a regular basis to educate our local bar owners, bartenders, and servers in regards to responsible beverage service training. I've had the opportunity to go to a number of conferences related to this particular grant, and just being able to see the work that our local law enforcement does to promote a safe community has been really incredible. So I want to say thank you. I want to publicly recognize our officers, including Sergeant McGrew, who has taken the lead on a lot of the DUI enforcement associated with this particular project. So thank you for your support as the City of Santa Barbara in continuing this particular program. It's intended to reduce drinking and driving in our community and excessive drinking in the downtown corridor. So thank you, and thank you to the Santa Barbara Police Department.
Thank you. Okay, is there a motion for the consent calendar?
Move the consent calendar.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Move on to item number 9.
California Voting Rights Act and District Elections presentation from National Demographics Corporation.
Thank you. This is a continuation of a panel discussion, or panel, we have a work session we had at the Faulkner Gallery in May. Mr. Kalam, would you like to introduce the topic?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members of the council, on May 29th, you held a workshop where we gave a brief introduction to the California Voting Rights Act, as well as alternative forms of election systems. After that, or during that session, the council asked us to come back with a demographer who might give you insight in 2 areas. One, some additional information about the Voting Rights Act, both state and federal, and what insight he or she might provide into the demographics of Santa Barbara as they relate to a Voting Rights Act process. So after that, in consultation with Mr. Armstrong, we retained National Demographics Corporation. Mr. Johnson, Doug Johnson, is here to present to you. He's the president of NDC. And you should have in front of you handouts that he's prepared. And with that, I'll turn it over to Doug Johnson.
Great. But before you get started, just to follow up, since that meeting, we voted to do an ad hoc committee of 3 of us, and Ms. Murillo, I think, had some notes from a meeting that we had recently on this topic. So I thought we'd bring that up at this point. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm pleased to chair the ad hoc committee and to have Mayor Schneider and Councilmember Rouse as part of our delegation to open communication with the Committee for District Elections. And we met with Crucito Herrera Cruz, who's in the audience today, Jacqueline Inda, and Frank Banales. And it was a very nice meeting. And we talked about possible electoral reform, having more Latinos on the city council, the benefits of district elections, one of them being neighborhood representation, having one person representing a smaller geographical area, not the whole city. We also discussed the different ways to change the charter. We're a charter city, so there's 2 ways for the city to go from our at-large system to district elections. One is by a vote of the people, and the other is through legal proceedings and a lawsuit. And the committee was frank in its position that a lawsuit is possible. But because we're the city government, we would hold community workshops and hold a robust public discussion about elections, and maybe going from odd year elections like we have it now to even year elections where there might be more people voting. We talked about voter registration, voter engagement, leadership training. If as some people want more Latinos on the city council, we would need to recruit and cultivate candidates. So we had a nice conversation, and we agreed to meet again. And I would open it to Mayor Schneider or to Councilmember Rouse if they wanted to add anything else.
I think you're pretty complete there.
Thorough, and then,
Mr. Rouse?
oh, sorry.
Okay. Nope.
Okay.
Great.
And Mr. Cruz is here, and if he wanted to chime in something during his public comment, I would be grateful for his addition.
I
Thank
think
you.
I saw Mr. Banales here, too.
And Mr. Banales,
Yep.
glad he's here, too. Thank
Great.
you.
Okay, Mr. Johnson, thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. It's a pleasure to be here. Just very briefly on national demographics.
We work with school districts, cities, water districts, all kinds of agencies up and down the state. We do both this kind of voting rights analysis and demographic profiling, and we also work with jurisdictions moving to districts and away from districts. We actually worked with Goleta when they first drew districts, and then when they put on the ballot moving to at-large. After the 2010 census, I did a little count, and we worked with about 105 jurisdictions in California, either drawing new districts or redistricting their old lines to update with the new census data that came out. So we've actually been doing this since 1979. I spoke with my former professors and bosses who started the firm, and they actually couldn't remember the exact year, but they did a similar presentation around the late 90s here in Santa Barbara when there was some discussion of looking at districts back then. It certainly is a topic that comes up a lot all across the state. Let me start with a little bit of background. Some of this may be a little repetitive of what you heard in the last discussion, but I do want to touch on it, in particular for members of the public who may not have been here at that time. But first of all, we're talking about election systems, and there are three main election systems in California. One is the system you have now, the at-large system, where everyone runs against everyone, and whoever, if there are 3 seats up in a given election, whoever are the 3 top vote getters are elected. Under that system, all voters in the city vote for all members of the council. There are no districts or any breakdowns, and anyone can run for office. The next system is called from district or residence districts. It's fairly rare, but there are some jurisdictions.
Excuse me just for a moment. Could you explain can be by post or top 2/3?
Oh, sure. There are variants on these different systems. So, for example, Modesto, before they were sued under this law, had a by post system where it was at large, but you ran for specific seats. So instead of everyone running against everyone, you declared you're running for seat 1, or I'm running for seat 2 on the council. It's a fairly rare system, but it's common in the South, or it used to be common in the South. So that would be the contrast between that and the more common, the top 2 or top 3 or top 4 win, depending on how many seats are open that year. The from district is a system where you have districts drawn, but the elections are still at large. So the candidates have to live in a given district, and you run to represent that district. It's similar to the by post system in that you run for a specific office. But the election is still at large, and all the voters in the city are voting for each seat that's listed. And then by district, which is the primary focus these days, this is where you draw districts. Each must have an equal number of people, and then only people who live in that district can run for the office, and only voters in that district can vote for who's going to represent it. So it's a much, as you were saying, as Mayor Pro Tem was saying, much smaller electorate, many fewer people involved in the decision, but you're only voting for one council member. You're no longer voting for the whole council anymore. There are lots of variations. As a charter city, you have kind of the world is open to you. You may have heard of instant runoffs. There's cumulative voting, which Santa Clarita recently voted to look into whether or not it's possible. Cumulative voting is a system where it's similar to at large, but instead of voting for 3 candidates when there's 3 seats open, you can cast all 3 of your votes for one person. So it's a little bit unusual. It's also very rare system, except in board elections. Corporation board elections are usually by cumulative voting. But you'd have 1, 2, and 3 slots on your ballot card, and you would mark who you want your first ballot to go to, who you want your second ballot to go to, and who you want your third ballot to go to, and they could all be the same person. Santa Clarita is wrestling with the challenge of there are no machines that count those votes in California. So they have to work through the process of, is that possible? Obviously, you're not going to hand count election results in any city of any size. But you do have lots of options open to you as a charter city. But the 3 main ones are the at-large, the from district, and the by district. And that's what we're talking about here.
Mr. Rouse has a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Johnston, is there any correlation statistically between size of agency and system used? I mean, is it typical for a different size city to use a certain system?
Yes. We at NDC have done a fairly comprehensive survey of California cities. I think we've gotten the information from about 440 of the 490 cities. the overwhelming majority of California cities are still at large, except for the biggest ones. So the top 15 cities all use some version of districts, with the exception of Anaheim. They are the kind of exception that proves the rule. They're 350-some thousand people, and they're still at large. But in my little table, they really pop out as the exception. What we find is that around 225 to 275,000 population, everyone starts talking about districts. They may not move to districts yet, but it starts coming up a lot. And this is even before the California Voting Rights Act was around. Because at that size, as the Mayor Modesto, the now Mayor Modesto put it when he was a council member, I went through 2 pairs of shoes trying to knock on every door. You start to get to a point where you just can't communicate with every voter, and the elections become about mail, and no one really wants that. So that's where the break really happens, and there's a real mix in that kind of 200, really 225 to 250 or 275,000 range. Below that is almost all at large, with one group of exceptions, and that is cities that have rapidly growing Latino populations, or that had at some point a rapidly growing Latino population. So we get another group of these cities, can be all different sizes. Watsonville, Salinas. There are lots of them that are smaller, that at some point the Latino population started growing really fast. And it became an issue where there was a feeling of a lack of representation on the council. And either because of a federal lawsuit, because when these jurisdictions all went back when there was no California law, either because of a federal lawsuit in many cases, or just as an effort to give a voice, they switched. The one exception, which is a little bit of a sad warning tale, is Colton, which resisted and resisted. Kind of the old guard resisted a rapidly growing Latino population, and then they realized that the numbers were going to tip, and that the Latinos were going to take over the whole council, and so the old guard tried to put in districts in order to preserve 2 or 3 of them on the council. Thankfully, given the motives clear there, they waited too long, and actually the Latinos were able to referend the decision to go to districts and killed it. They later went back to districts by choice in order to have neighborhood representation long after Latinos had shown they could elect as many council members as they wanted. So there are, as you know, in cities, there are stories for every opportunity, but those are the 2 things. The big cities are almost all districts, and then we have about 15, I think, cities where there's been a quickly growing Latino population, so they've moved either because of a lawsuit or just to give a voice to that population.
San Francisco, both districts and instant runoff voting? Is it both?
Yes, they are instant runoff in each district.
In each district?
Yeah.
Okay, so there is both. Ms. Murillo has a question, then Mr. Hotchkiss.
I was just going to ask you to explain instant runoff, because it seemed like you were going to move off of that.
Yes.
But and I don't think, we've talked about these things before, but different members of the public tune in at different times. So if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Instant runoff, it doesn't really go to the question of the Voting Rights Act. It doesn't really play in there. But what it is people rank all the candidates running for office from 1 to, well, in theory, they rank it from 1 to 10 if there's 10 people running. Again, we have machine problems. And so in all the cities that do it now, I think they're limited to 3 or 4 or maybe 5 choices. And what they do is they tally all the first place votes. And if nobody got a majority of the first place votes, well, then whoever came in last is dropped. And all the people that voted for candidate number 10 as their first place choice, well, then the machines go back and count their second place choices. And so then they add those choices in and see until eventually enough people are dropped that someone eventually gets to a majority. In theory. There's a problem in that the machines in California only allow a handful of choices. And so in every election where no one's won it outright, actually the majority is achieved by people's votes no longer getting counted. So we have a machine problem, as is so often the case in California elections. So no one's actually gotten to a majority of votes cast. What they've gotten to is a majority of votes that we're still counting.
But doesn't it make sense if there's 3 open seats, you would put 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, it's used for single winner elections. I don't know. I think one of the jurisdictions has got it rigged somehow that they can do it for multiple winter elections, but it gets really complicated in that case, and it's confusing for voters with just one winner.
Okay.
That's fine.
Yeah.
We got it.
Yeah.
Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You mentioned cities with a rapidly growing minority population, in this case Latino. What constitutes rapidly growing?
Well, I've got some demographics in here about Santa Barbara, and you're definitely not in the rapidly growing category
That answers
in any
the
way.
question. Thank you.
Okay. Why don't you continue with your presentation? Thank you.
Okay. So in order to set the stage for the California Voting Rights Act, I need to mention a little bit about the Federal Voting Rights Act. This has, of course, been law since 1965 and has been used and has many, many, many precedents and is very clearly understood by all of us in the field. It has 4 tests, and a jurisdiction has to fail all 4 before the court will order it into district elections. So the first is, can the protected class, which is the language that the law uses for Latinos, African Americans, Native Americans, or Asian Americans. We often refer in shorthand to minority groups, but the law is actually about protected classes. Can they constitute the majority of a district? Can a council district, in your case, be drawn where Latinos would be 50% of the district population or the district voters? Then the second question is, if that's true...
They're 2 different things, though.
Well, yes, and that's part of the unanswered question of the federal law. There are some unanswered questions. Here, they have to be a majority of the citizens of voting age in the Ninth Circuit. In other circuits, it's voting age population. So you're all paying very close attention. This is good. I have to be careful of my words. So that's the first test. Can there be a majority? And most of the cases actually end there. Usually the district can't be drawn. If a district can be drawn, then you have to show that the protected class can vote as a block. And I'll talk in considerable detail about this, because this is where we get into the polarized voting question. If they vote as a block, then do the rest of the voters, who are not a member of that protected class, vote as a block against them and defeat their preferred candidate? So that's where the polarized voting is defeating the Latino preferred candidate. And then if all 3 of those are shown to be true, then comes the question of, do the totality of circumstances indicate that race is an issue? So, for example, it can be overt. You know, in the South, back in the 60s and 70s, you had overt racist appeals. It can be covert. It is things like a white candidate running against an African-American candidate puts their opponent's picture in their flyers, kind of saying, hey, look, this other guy's an African-American. And then if they're running against an Anglo candidate, they don't put their opponent's picture in the flyers. There are lots of ways that this happens in a federal case. But the goal is that the courts have said this can't just be coincidental. There has to be race driving the vote in some way. So I do that as an introduction to the California Voting Rights Act, because what the California law did is it made it much easier to file and win these cases. So the first rule from the federal law, can the protected class be a majority of the district? You no longer have to show that. Any protected class can bring a lawsuit on the California Voting Rights Act, regardless of their size and concentration. The question of, are they concentrated enough to be a majority of a district, comes up in the remedy stage. Once a jurisdiction has been found guilty of a violation, then the judge can look at districts, can look at cumulative voting, can look at all those different options. Then we get this question of block voting. Is there polarized voting between the protected class block and the other blocks? And I'll get into that in more detail. Then the fourth question, is there race at play in the elections? That's gone as well. The law, as I'll talk about very briefly, was written by plaintiffs' attorneys for plaintiffs' attorneys. The plaintiffs can use totality of circumstances evidence against the city. The city can only use it as rebuttal. They cannot use it as defense. So this law is very heavily weighted in favor of potential plaintiffs, and this is one of the ways. So it's not a defense no longer to say, as often happens in Central Valley, well, the Anglos are Republican and the Latinos are Democrat, and they're actually voting on party lines. In a federal case, that's a huge issue. If it's partisan voting, you don't have a violation. No longer a protection here. It doesn't matter what the reason is, as long as we can show the statistics. So The law is also very unclear. I was talking to the city attorney and telling a little bit of the background of how this law became a law. It literally was signed in the middle of the night, just before midnight. Everyone missed it. The league didn't track it. The school board association didn't track it. No one really had input in it. And as a result, it's not very clear. So it talks about in the one section that at-large elections cannot impair the ability of a protected class to elect people to the council, which makes sense and is a very legitimate, civil rights claim, just like the federal law. But in order to prove a violation, there's no need to show impairment. The separate section that says a violation is shown simply says if you have polarized voting, you're in violation. One of the quirks, and I debate this with people in Sacramento, is Latinos could still win. You can have polarized voting and Latinos just vote in numbers or get enough crossover that they still win. Under the way the law is written, Latinos could win every election and you could still be in violation of the law. So it is not the clearest of all laws. So that's why there's a lot of questions. We really have no legislation, or we have no litigation on this. Palmdale, as you probably have heard, is the only jurisdiction that's gone into court to fight this on the facts. Modesto fought it on whether or not it's constitutional, but Palmdale's the only fight over the facts, and they lost. And the judge's ruling is only 9 pages, including the cover page. He clearly was saying this is going up on appeal. Have fun, guys. So we don't have any guidance on any of these terms or what they really mean, other than awarding $3.2 million to the plaintiffs. So when we talk about block voting, and this is really getting into the nuts and bolts of it, the federal precedents, which is what they're trying to draw on, come out of the South. And they look first at homogeneous precincts. In the South, where all these cases started, you had 95 to 100% African American precincts, and you had 100% Anglo precincts because housing was so segregated. So those are the main precincts we looked at. For the mixed precincts, to kind of fill in between those data sets, we use what's called ecological regression, which is a statistical analysis where we look at how the vote for a candidate changes as the demographics of a precinct change. But I do want to emphasize that it was used to fill in between these homogeneous precincts. So we knew how the 100% African American precincts voted. We knew how the 100% Anglo precincts voted. We were just estimating in between. The challenge in California is we don't have homogeneous precincts. There are almost no precincts anywhere in the state that are 100% Latino. And there are very few that are 100% Anglo. So we have an added challenge here. In some cases where they don't have regression analysis or they don't have sufficient data, they'll use surveys and exit polls. They'll actually exit poll the voters. Those are very expensive and very inexact, so they're very rarely used. One thing I do want to emphasize, though, is that in particular in California cases, polarized voting does not mean that there's any form of prejudice or discrimination. What it means is that the statistics are showing people who tend to be Latino tend to vote for one candidate, and people who tend to not be Latino vote for another candidate. The actual reason why they're voting could be education levels, income levels, homeowners versus renters, all the factors that we all know drive elections.
If I might ask, how do you tend to be Latino?
Oh, sorry, precincts that tend to be Latino.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So it's one of the things is that we're looking for a correlation. Like I said, in the Central Valley, we get the Latinos are almost entirely Democratic and the Anglos are almost entirely Republican. So we often look in those analyses at the Abel Maldonado versus Gavin Newsom election for lieutenant governor, when almost all the Latinos voted for Anglo Gavin Newsom, and almost all the Republicans voted for Latino Abel Maldonado. And we say, look, yes, there's a polarized voting, but the reason is partisanship. Well, we haven't gotten anywhere. No one's taken that into court yet, so we don't know how that will play out in the end. But that's one thing I often talk about is that polarized voting is very common. And unless you see that the different communities have similar education levels, have similar home ownership levels, have similar income levels, you're going to get some degree of polarization. Whether it's polarization that defeats their preferred candidate, we don't know. That's what we have to get into the numbers to look at. But this is one of the problems with interpreting the law and telling anyone for sure, yes, you're vulnerable, no, you're not. When we do these analysis, the answer is always gray. There's never black and white, except in some extreme cases where we say, you need to change tomorrow. And I don't anticipate that Santa Barbara would be one of those. I think it'll be one of those where the answer is gray. It's not crystal clear either way because of these lack of clarity. So kind of covered this pretty well. One of the challenges is that different statisticians using different mathematical tools will get different answers. And that's where we end up in court. And that is a big reason why these court cases are so expensive, is they are huge battles of experts. We spend weeks in depositions. We spend, in Palmdale, I think we spent 3 weeks in court arguing about it for a ruling where the judge more or less punted to the appeals court. So all the statistical analysis, all the experts that it takes for these analysis is why these cases are so expensive and why you see $1 million and multi-million-dollar settlements. So what I've done just for you today is to look at what we call level 1. This is not getting into the polarized voting analysis. That's the next stage of analysis if you want to go into that. This is really looking at, just as a surface level of demographics in your election history, are you fine? Are you doomed? or does it take more information to have a solid answer? So there are really 3 questions I'm looking at here. First is there a significant protected class population? The second is, have protected class preferred candidates been elected? Or at least in this stage, we're only looking at protected class candidates themselves because we don't know the preferences. And then, can a majority protected class district be drawn? Would be the third question for this level 1 before we get into polarization. As you know, you have at-large elections. Your demographics. Latinos in Santa Barbara are about 38%, and my apologies, we're moving quickly. Some of these labels may not be crystal clear. The top left box, oops, there we go, sorry. The top left box is total population. So it says population, Hispanic origin. NH stands for non-Hispanic. So non-Hispanic white. You can ignore the DOJ. It's how we group the multiple answers. So non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic black. Non-Hispanic Indian is the census terminology for Native Americans. It's not Indian, East Asian Indian, it's Native Americans. Then Asian American, Hawaiian, I don't know why the census switched this in 2010. It actually includes all Pacific Islanders. So Samoans, everyone else will be in there. Other, and then other multi-race. So your first box is total population. As you can see, 38% Hispanic or Latino, 55% non-Hispanic white. The next box, 18 plus, is your voting age population.
Excuse me, if I might ask,
Sure.
That 38% is self-identified?
Yes, in the door-to-door census.
It's not done by last name or anything like that?
Right. I'm going to get to some data that is by last name, but yes, that's self-identified on the census forms.
On the census forms?
Yes,
Okay,
in
okay.
2010. And the next box, the voting age, 18 plus, is also from the 2010 census forms. It's the same categories, just breaking down those who are 18 and above. And no surprise, Latinos here are younger than the general population, as they are essentially everywhere in California. So the Latino population is down to 33. Non-Hispanic white is 60%. The next category, my apologies for kind of the demographic shorthand here. The ST categories, that's the Census Bureau's special tabulation of citizens of voting age. So this is your citizens of voting age population. You probably remember there's no citizenship question on the decennial census form. There probably will be in 2020, but there wasn't in 2010. So this data is not from the 2010 census. The Census Bureau does what's called the American Community Survey every year. They phone, mail, or knock on the door of 1 million households nationwide and ask questions like, how much education do you have? How much income do you have? Do you work in white collar or blue collar? Do you ride your bike or take mass transit or drive to work? Do you have indoor plumbing? All those questions that we often think of coming from the census now come from this American Community Survey. And in there is, how old are you? What ethnicity are you? And are you a citizen? So this data comes from the Census Bureau, but not from the 2010 census. It comes from a separate survey. So that's where, so the H is for Hispanics. 24% of citizens of voting age in Santa Barbara are Hispanic. 69% of citizens of voting age are non-Hispanic white. And if you go to districts, you'll hear a lot of talk about this because citizens of voting age is what the California courts have defined as the eligible voters. People may choose not to register, they may choose not to vote, but once you are a citizen of voting age, you can register and you are eligible to vote. There's a small number of felons who temporarily lose the right to vote in California, but that number is very, very low and doesn't really impact the overall percentages. It really disappears in the margin of error. So that's the number that we really focus on for voting rights enforcement in California. Down below that, this is surname data, to your point earlier. The registration and voter turnout data is compiled by the state. California does this. They take the voter rolls from every county and they compare it to a Spanish surname list, an Asian surname list, and a Filipino surname list. And they count how many people. So that's where we get Latino registration. It's based on the surnames in the voter rolls. And obviously, surnames are very imprecise. You know, we're talking about big numbers here when we're talking about all the registered voters in the city. So most of the errors will cancel out, but obviously there's some error. So we're at 19% Latinos in terms of registered voters and 18% of voters casting ballots in November.
For example, I mean, you don't have this by gender, but many women, when they get married, they change their name. So they might have had one name, they might be of one ethnicity, married someone of another ethnicity, changed the name, which would have skewed the results here. And but you're not delineating married women, for example, out of this at all.
Right. There's no way to do that. The challenge in this field is that when we're looking at voting rights, we really want to be looking at who voted. We want to know the ethnicity of the people casting ballots, which is that bottom left category. The problem is that when we get there, we have the least reliable of all the data because it is based on surnames. Who cast ballots is based on voter rosters. You know, so there are data entry errors and things like that. So we do know that statewide, the surname lists in California underestimate the Latino population by about 10%. So if, in this case, you're 18, that has a 1.8% increase because of the statewide adjustment. The Census Bureau actually can look at the census forms and say who has what surname and did they mark Hispanic. We can't do that. So it is a ballpark. You're about 20% of your voters casting ballot. And then on the right, there's all kinds of other data. When we're getting into communities of interest and actually drawing lines, if you go there, then we can look at all kinds of stuff like language spoken at home, income levels, education levels, renters, owners, all that kind of stuff is all available from the same data set. To the question of growth, you are seeing growth in your Latino population. Obviously, in a community that's not growing very quickly overall, you're not going to see much growth in terms of any of your subpopulations either. But you are seeing some growth. From 20 to 2010, Latino population went from 35 to 38. Amongst voting age population, went from 30 to 33. And you can see the biggest jump actually is among voter registration from 14 to 19%. So it's actually a good sign that you're seeing some growth in your eligible voters and a lot of growth in your registered voters. So the Latino population that's here is getting more and more likely to actually register and participate.
And what is CVAP?
Oh, that is the citizens of voting age. Citizens of voting age population. The overall trend from the state, we get data going back to 1994 on registration. And you can see back then it was Latinos or Spanish surnamed registrants were 12%. They're now up to 17% Spanish surnamed. They get up a little higher when we include the adjustment.
Excuse me, if I could go back to the last slide. You got voting age population and citizens of voting age population. Is the difference between those two illegal immigrants?
No, a good question. Because this is a common misperception. No, it's legal residents. There may be some illegal counts in there too, but there are obviously tens of millions of people that are here perfectly legally, but that are not citizens. You know, green cards and all that kind of.
Thank you.
Actually, there was a proposal at the last minute to put citizenship on the census form, and the Louisiana senator who initially proposed it proposed putting on the question, are you legal or illegal? As if anyone would answer that. But they did later. Thankfully, Sandy came, the census forms had already been printed, and the question of citizenship was left for 2020. Similarly, you're getting trends among voter turnout. People actually casting ballots have gone, we only have data back to 2002 on this, but have gone from 12% to 16%. There's a slight difference you may notice between these tables and the chart, the spreadsheet I showed you earlier. That's that adjustment that I put into the chart. Here we only have Spanish surnamed. It's not adjusted for that error factor that we know is there.
And I want to point out on here that you're only looking at even year or statewide elections, not elections that happen in the city of Santa Barbara, because I bet those numbers might be more of a zigzag as it would be for voter turnout anyway.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yes, this is one of the challenges that we have this data from the state for the state elections. If we really get into the nuts and bolts of this, we would start going and getting your voter turnout rolls from your elections and running the surname list. But yes, generally it's only available from the state for state elections. The other question is whether protected class candidates are running and whether or not they're winning. You have no shortage of protected candidates running, so that's good. We have a lot of jurisdictions where no one runs because the potential plaintiffs say they're just intimidated and they think they don't have a prayer, so they're not even willing to run. You have a lot of Latinos running, a handful of African Americans, and one Asian American running twice. And so, obviously, start with the short one. The Asian American, you have Mr. Williams, elected in 2003, re-elected in 2011. I'm sorry, in 2007. Among African Americans, you have two who have run. Each ran twice. One was appointed and then he ran unsuccessfully, was appointed to the council, then lost his re-election campaign. Another one ran once for council and once for mayor and lost both. Latinos, you have Latinos getting elected in 1997 and 2011. Obviously, the vice mayor. I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm so used to saying vice mayor. My apologies. Mayor Pro Tem. And then you have a handful running in the other years, a couple running a bunch of times, and then Latinos running. So you do have some winning, but you have a lot more losing, which does raise a concern. Then in your packet is a big table. I won't go through this whole table, but the color bands are each election, so that you can isolate the different, the council, mayor for each year. The highlighted green is the people who won, and then over at the right is the ethnicity to the best degree we can identify it. And my thanks to your staff. We actually worked with city staff to go through and identify exactly who was which ethnicity to the best degree possible. There are always questions. In the Anaheim case, one of the council members is half Filipina, half Mexican American, and the plaintiff's attorney actually said she doesn't count. So this is part of the question of the law. We just don't know. And that may have just been plaintiff's attorneys saying what plaintiff's attorneys say.
Forgive me if I could ask you to go back to the last slide where we have protected class candidates. How do we determine who is a protected class candidate?
Well, the federal law sets that Latinos, African Americans, Native Americans, and Asian Americans are protected class.
So if somebody was named Cordero, for instance, and had been here for 150 years and was not Latino in the sense of coming from South America or Central America, but in fact originally from Spain, would they be classified as a protected class?
This is one of the challenges of the California law. We don't know. Under federal law, the ethnicity of the candidates really doesn't matter. It's all about the ethnicity of the voters that matters. And whoever the Latino voters prefer is their preferred candidate, and that's what we focus on. California's law adds language saying to focus on the protected class candidates. And so we don't really know how they would define that when to break it down. Under the federal precedents, we'd say do the voters perceive them to be Latino or Asian American? In the case of the Anaheim councilwoman, preparing for that case, we actually got her flyers and her statements at forums saying, I am a Latina, to the public and coming across that. Clearly making the argument that she was and that the voters knew she was. But it's never been hashed out in court. We don't know how our court would perceive that clause of the law.
Because, for instance, I don't recall, I may be wrong, but Mr. Williams stating that he was Asian American, but we've got him on here.
Mm-hmm.
Question is why?
Well, I was working with city staff when we were trying to identify to the best degree we could.
Okay, so it's a little bit subjective.
Oh, it's very subjective in many cases, yes. In my own city of Glendale, Frank Quintero has been on the council forever. His ethnicity is actually Basque Spanish, but he founded the Glendale Latino Association. So do the voters perceive him as Latino? Yes. Under this law, would he be Latino? Probably. We don't really know.
Can you repeat his name?
Quintero?
Oh.
Frank Quintero. And so, so this is all part of the vague nature of this law that we all thought Anaheim was going to fight this tooth and nail and go all the way and that we'd get all these issues clarified. Because of, to some degree, that the plaintiffs really backed off in Anaheim and the case settled, and they're putting it on the ballot. But so someday someone will take this all the way in court and spend the $4 to $6 million that takes, and we'll get resolution. But until then, we're left in this gray area. So this is all really the details that led to the table before, so I won't go through too much, but you have it. The last piece that I want to mention is, are the populations concentrated? As I mentioned, this isn't a requirement now under California. This is one of the changes from federal law. But it does highlight whether or not someone's going to target you. If someone wants districts, it doesn't do any good if there's no concentration of a voter of a protected class. So your Asian Americans and your African Americans, really there's no concentration. The numbers aren't there. You can see the purple all across the city with just some very small exceptions of the next degree up. There really is no concentration of either one of these groups in the city. Latinos are a different story. You really do get a concentration. You can see the red is 75% and above Latino percentage of citizens of voting age. So this is actually looking at that eligible voter population. Over there around, is it Lincoln Elementary or Franklin Elementary School? Franklin, thank you. Around Franklin Elementary School, you get a significant concentration of Latinos. That's the red and yellow over on the east side. And then just on the west side of the freeway, through the kind of geographic city, you get a second concentration of Latinos. So those are the two concentrations. You definitely do have it. One of the things I want to flag, be careful when you're looking at these maps. Don't worry so much about one census block that pops up at you. For example, up here, you have one census block that's bright red. I was talking about in Irvine, there's one census block in the heart of Irvine that is 100% Latino. It's the Irvine Spectrum, which has 2 on-site custodians that live on-site, and they're both Latino. So be careful with percentage maps. You want to be sure you're looking at census blocks that actually have a number of people in them. But you certainly do around the school and then along the west side of the freeway. Oops. So as my last slide, when we're looking at this, is there a significant, in numbers, protected class population? Yes, you have Latinos. Have protected class candidates been elected? We don't know whether or not they were preferred yet, but we do know, to the best degree we can, that you've had a couple of Latinos elected and a handful of Latinos not elected who were defeated, and then African Americans were defeated, but as we saw, they're not a significant population. And then can a majority protected class district be drawn? We haven't looked at this yet, just in this first cut of analysis, but just looking at those numbers, or looking at those maps of concentration, it sure looks like that's a possibility. So this is, as I said, a first take on the analysis. If you wanted to direct us to start the district elections process, we can skip the rest of the analysis and jump right into that. If you prefer, we can certainly look more in detail. We can look at, is there polarized voting in your council elections? Can actually draw the lines and confirm whether or not a majority district can be drawn? Or we can stop and we can just be happy with this analysis. And
Thank you.
Cross your fingers.
We have a couple questions before we get to public comment. Mr. Hart?
Can you put up the slide that had the council candidates, the ones that have run? There we go. I just quickly looked at the results and added that. I think this might be helpful for folks to just put these two numbers together. So if you start with 1997, former Councilmember Garcia was reelected to the council. He got 22% of the vote in that election. In 2001, candidate Quintero was defeated for council, got 4% of the vote. In 2001, then Councilmember Garcia was defeated but got 27% of the vote in the race for mayor. In 2003, candidate Quintero got 3% of the vote. The candidate Quintero in 2005 got 5% of the vote. Council candidate Cruz in 2009 got 3% of the vote. Council member Murillo in 2011 got 16% of the vote and was elected. In 2011, council candidate Aldana got 2% of the vote. In 2011, council candidate Cruz got 2% of the vote. In 2013, council candidate Diaz-Ali got 11% of the vote. And in 2013, council candidate Cruz got 3% of the vote.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, obviously, you're pretty familiar with the mechanics of the law and how the purpose and the intent. And as I look at the population distribution map, if you could click back to that, and not super clear or easy, but if for example, you were just to go to districts, and the districts would be split up in the same number as the seated candidates you have. So in this case, it'd be 6 districts plus a mayor, if that were the case. And yet your district's concentration showed that 1 or 2 districts would have the protected classes represented. I mean, I don't know what the intent, it doesn't imagine to me the intent of the law would be that you would want to have a council that looked like the percentage population. But with those concentrations, couldn't that actually work against that concept? In other words, you'd have your distribution be skewed the other way. I mean, does that come up in these things, and how is there a remedy for that, or is that one of those gray things you talked about before?
I thought this was going to be an issue in Palmdale. Palmdale is actually majority Latino amongst its eligible voters, amongst its citizens of voting age. And they're not that concentrated. There's certainly a part of Palmdale that's more Latino and a part that's not. But the plaintiffs only drew a district that was 50, well, by their measures, 51. It's currently probably about 54%. So the city at large was about 52% Latino. They drew 2 remedy districts that were about 54% Latino. Is that really improving their ability? And as you say, it concentrated all the Latinos. So as a majority of eligible voters, if they were to turn out, they could elect the whole council. Now they're concentrated in those 2 seats, and the rest of the population will elect the other 2 seats. We thought this was going to be an issue. The city certainly raised it. The judge didn't mention it at all. And it goes to that question of impairment. In Palmdale, the city didn't go this far, but you could very well make the case that districts will impair the Latino ability to elect because they're a majority of the eligible voters. But the city didn't go there, and the judge didn't go there. We'll see when that comes up again. But, I mean, that's exactly the question in Colton. When the old guard tried to go to districts in order to impair the ability of Latinos to elect the whole council, it certainly can be the case. And this is a big issue in certain circles to debate, not so much here where you're not getting fast growth like you are in Salinas or those jurisdictions, but is getting a seat today worth giving up controlling the whole council in 20 years? This is very similar to debate a few years ago here in the county about splitting Santa Barbara County in half. When Santa Maria tried to split the county, and then they realized, oh, wait, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. If we wait 10 years, we'll be a majority of the county's population. We can elect the whole board of supervisors. So it's not just an ethnic thing. It's a voting dynamics thing. And we just don't know whether that issue of impairment and the net effect will ever come up.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We do have some public Mr. Hotchkiss, I think, has another question.
I guess this is appropriate to ask now. Are you qualified to talk on the legal status of all this that we're addressing now?
Well, I'm an expert witness for Palmdale, so I was firsthand in that case. I've been I think of all the lawsuits filed, there are 2 that I'm not a consultant to the jurisdiction on. So this is all firsthand stuff. I don't know about what level of qualifications you would say. I'm not an attorney, so I'm not giving a legal opinion.
But is my understanding that no city that is now at large has prevailed in when challenging the district concept? Am I correct?
Oh, yes. That's easy because there's only been one case. Modesto challenged the constitutionality of the law but didn't fight it. Once they lost on that question, they didn't fight the facts.
Okay.
Palmdale's the only case.
Well, I'll ask the question later of our city attorney then. I think that's all I have right now. Thank you.
And Mr. Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So maybe this goes to the further analysis that you were talking about, but is there any way, given what you've looked at so far, of determining whether there is racially polarized voting?
Not given what I've looked at so far, that would be the next step, would be to get into those numbers and look precinct by precinct at the election results and the demographics.
Okay. And so, for instance, let me just give you an example. So, because I've looked at the precinct data closely, and so, for instance, in the 2011 election, in the precinct that is more or less centered there around the Franklin School, in that district, the Hispanic candidates in that race got the most votes of anywhere in the city, of any precinct in the city. But the Anglo candidates got far larger votes. Would that, just knowing that much, what would that tell you about the question of racial polarization?
It would raise a concern. The key question that we'll have to sort out is the slope of the difference between how the Latino candidates did in the other precincts. If it's just a slight increase as you get to the precinct around the school, well, then you may be okay. It may be that the Latino voters' preference is not the Latino candidates. If they did much better in that precinct than they did in other precincts, even if that's, they went from 0.5% to 4% and they were in 5th place in both precincts, then that's going to come out as polarized voting. So that's the challenge that we get into, is it's the slope of that difference that we're looking at.
I see. Okay. Thank you very much.
Ms. Murillo?
And I'm going to bring up the word gerrymandering, and how would you accomplish a district with the protected class without having someone alleging that practice?
Sure. This is one of the tricks of the Federal Voting Rights Act, because once you move to drawing lines, as soon as you decide to draw lines, then you're free and clear of the California law. It doesn't say anything about how the lines will be drawn. So that frees you of the California law. The federal law governs how the lines are drawn, and you can both fail to accommodate the protected class sufficiently. You can draw lines that aren't compliant, and you can go too far. So what the courts have said is that you have to consider race, and you have to be careful not to dilute Latino voting strength. But you also cannot go too far. Race cannot be the predominant factor, is the term. So I can't take this map, even though I could in my software, and draw a line around the red and yellow census blocks. That would be using race as the predominant factor, and you'd be going too far, and racially gerrymandering, you call it. So what happens is we focus on neighborhoods. I, as your consultant, keep an eye on the numbers. We make sure we're not diluting voting strength. But when we're drawing lines, we're not saying, is this census block Latino or not? We're saying, this neighborhood is, Park X neighborhood. Is it part of that neighborhood or not? And we're trying to keep all neighborhoods together. It is a little bit of a danger zone, but we've been through it hundreds of times. And I keep saying, someday I won't be able to say this anymore. But not only have none of the plans that we drew ever been overturned in court, actually none of the local plans that we've drawn have even been challenged in court, because we take a very conservative approach to making sure. The whole goal of this is, one goal of this is not to get sued, so you don't want to go to districts and then get sued over your districts.
Yeah, I'm hoping we don't get sued, too. But one final question. So a preferred candidate, by that expression, you mean preferred by the protected class?
Correct.
So if we ask you to do more work, that would be one of the data points that you could let us know.
Yes.
Okay.
To the degree the data shows it, I would tell you. It may very well come back gray if it looks like this is true. What I often end up doing in presentations, especially because most of these are in closed session, is this is what I interpret the data as showing. This is how the plaintiff's expert will interpret the data as showing. So
there would be racially polarized voting if Latinos voted for the preferred candidate, but non-Latinos didn't. Am I getting that right?
As a general idea, yes. The Latinos have to prefer that candidate. So if it's a top 3 election, the math needs to show that among Latinos, that candidate was one of the top 3. So it may be that the Latinos prefer a candidate more than non-Latinos do. Maybe 1% of non-Latinos support it and 3% of Latinos do. But that candidate's not in the top 3 of either group. That would not be a preferred candidate because Latino, even amongst an election where there were only Latinos voting, which is really where we go with this, that candidate would still not win. So we're looking both at that slope that I talk about and what is the final percentage of did that candidate win among the Latino voters.
Thank you.
Mr. Hotchkiss, and then we'll go to public comment.
What would happen if we drew districts as you are suggesting might be necessary, and in the Latino district, a non-Latino was elected?
It happens all the time. And as long as the districts were not drawn in a way that diluted their ability to elect, you weren't, as long as you hadn't sliced off a corner of the Latino population to keep their percentage, 52 instead of 56%, that's fine. That's exactly what happened in Modesto. They got sued, they went to districts. No organized Latino candidate ran. And the Latino district that was the heart of a $5 million lawsuit elected a retired Anglo member of the NRA board and Republican Central Committee. It was a lot of money for that result. But it happens. But as long as the districts are drawn in a way that doesn't discriminate, well, the voters still have to turn out and vote. There's no guarantee to elect anyone.
Okay, thank you. We might have questions for you after public comment. We'll start with Crucito Herrera Cruz and then Sebastian Aldana. And you have 2 minutes here at the podium.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Kathy Murillo and Randy Rouse for being present at the meeting with district-based election members Frank Bañales, myself, and Jacqueline Inda. We greatly appreciate the open dialogue to come to some resolution to really adhere to the California Voting Rights Act in Santa Barbara. Mr. Johnson basically leads to the standard of one person, one vote. One vote is the value on the east side. One value a vote is worth on the west side. So in that sense, we have to consider the California Voting Rights Act since 2009, since 2011, since 2013, when I've already put it on public notice that we should go to district-based elections. Why? It's fundamentally important because it's the democratization of America. Here it starts locally. The statistic is wrong. I am not Latino. I'm an Americano. That's what gives me the privilege to run. That's already racism in itself in the sense of identifying it. Identifying Mexican Americans, Hispanics, we're all Americans. If we get institutionally attuned to that, then we'll be a better polity. But until then, we have to either consider a lawsuit, but it's not on the table. Let's have open dialogue. I really greatly appreciate all the district-based election members that are present here today and not present here today that support this issue. It's multicultural. It's about representation in our community. Again, if I had extra time, I could debunk Mr. Johnson's arguments right now real quickly, but I choose to defer that to a later time. I greatly appreciate the City Council for being open ears. Thank you for the statistics. Mr. Hotchkiss, the CVAP, the citizen voting age population, also considers people that don't have the eligibility to have their citizenship. They're also considered residents in the Estados Unidos. They also have the obedience to the law to the flag of the United States. They pay taxes. They clean our houses. They do the gardening. So we have to be respectful because their children are American citizens. So the CVAP also considers everybody. So the statistics really represent 50% of the population, not 38% of the population. So we have to get real. Thank you very much. Sorry for the overtime.
Sebastian Aldana Jr. will be followed by Mickey Flax and then Isaac Garrett.
Hello, Madam Mayor, City Council. My name is Sebastian Aldana Jr., East Side resident. I do support district elections 100%. To have all the neighborhoods represented properly in Santa Barbara. I am a little puzzled, actually, maybe a little disappointed on one issue, and that is I understood here in Santa Barbara, council had until approximately June 24th to put it on the ballot. But then Santa Maria had a few issues regarding district elections, and then they had until August 8th to put on the ballot. And I'm just wondering, how could it be any different if we both vote on November 4th? I did some research on the election codes, and on the election code 10403, it clearly states that a city has at least 88 days prior to the date of election to file with the Board of Supervisors, which is August 8th. So not sure where the mix-up was, but I'm sure it was an honest mistake. Bottom line, I see it if you all wanted district elections on the ballot, you had and maybe still have enough time to do that because we have until August 8th. And also, if I could touch on one other item, being that you will be interviewing for a new city administrator, unless it's Mr. Paul Casey that's going to be hired, that you...
And keep your comments to the topic on the agenda.
Oh, okay. So then I will stop right there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. To answer your question, the County Board of Supervisors is not in session most of July and into August past the 8th. So there is no meeting for a Board of Supervisors to adopt whatever it is we'd send them. So that was part of the decision making. Ms. Flax and then Mr. Garrett.
I want to compliment the consultant, I think, for presenting very useful data and also highlighting the data that we don't have that I think you need to make any kind of informed decision. We still have to determine whether we have a polarized electorate. The fact that Latino candidates get votes from all over the city, and in the Latino areas, non-Latino candidates get votes is very instructive, and the numbers have to be teased out. The second issue that we need is what are the voting patterns in the different areas? And here the community of interest that he mentioned is important. I know the courts don't like it, but it seems to me that political party affiliation makes a very big difference, even though this is a nonpartisan election, in big quotation marks. Everybody seems to know who is with which party and what they represent. And I think that's part of what has to be analyzed to see if we have polarized voting. Also, I mean, that's an easy way. That's a kind of shorthand for more renters, lower income groups, all kinds of stuff like that can be inferred from participation or registration in the Democratic Party. The third important issue is what are the turnout numbers in the different areas for both odd and even years. Mayor Schneider alluded to it in the fact that we just saw for even years, and we also didn't see it, well, we saw it by Latino population. But we will need, if we are ever to draw any kind of boundaries, we will need it for precincts or areas, not just population, because as we see, we don't have the kind of segregated population that you have in other cities. So I think that our consultant has more valuable work to do, and to always keep in mind that in order to improve democracy in this community, it is not simply a question of drawing lines that would make more likely Latino candidates. It's drawing lines that would make, and doing other things that would make more likely equal turnout or more equal turnout throughout the city.
Thank you.
And the moving to even year elections seems to be the best way to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Garrett?
Madam Mayor, members of council, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon regarding the district election. I believe that government that is closest to the people is the best representative government for the people. In this city, as you know, we have the at-large election, and candidates, in order to win, you need to raise north of $75,000 to run an effective campaign to win a seat on the city council. That's absolutely, to me, ridiculous. The at-large system might serve a small portion of the city very well, but it does not serve the majority of this city well. We talk about low voter turnout. Has anyone ever done a study or a survey to determine why we have such low voter turnout? I haven't done a study, but I have talked to a number of people when I was out on the campaign trail. And what some of them tell me is they are completely disgusted with the way their officials ignore their requests for service. I know that some of you have the idea that you would rather have 1 or 7 representatives than 1. But to me, I would rather have 1 representative that was going to listen to my concerns than to have 10 who was going to ignore them. Government is supposed to represent the people and not a small elitist group. Dealing with your finance, we have had, and probably
Wind up,
still will
please.
in the future, my time is up. Well, I just say this, outside influence with finances. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes the public comment. It's back to the council. So I guess the issue is whether or not the council would like to authorize staff to have Mr. Johnson continue his analysis. And I don't know if Mr. Kalan or Mr. Armstrong can tell us what kind of process that would take, or... Mr.
Madam Mayor,
Kalan?
members of the council, we've had a brief discussion with Mr. Johnson about the cost of doing that. It's well within the city administrator's authority, including the costs we've expended to date. Where I'd like some flexibility is in the forum that the report comes back. I think it's good to be transparent, but I also think it's prudent to be cautious as we go forward, particularly as you look at a racially polarized voting analysis. So my suggestion would be that if you do authorize additional work, that you give the city administrator and I the flexibility to recommend a closed session if we think that's appropriate. The council, of course, can always reject that recommendation and have the report presented in open session. But without seeing what the data might be, I'd like to at least have that flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Murillo?
I have a question for Mr. Johnson, if I may. Is there a trend in California of going from odd year to even years? You know, we're an odd year election cycle.
It's been a part of some of the settlements that have been discussed. Interestingly, the jurisdictions where it's been discussed the most are the jurisdictions where the county no longer allows it. LA County and San Bernardino County won't allow a jurisdiction to consolidate.
They won't allow what?
They won't allow cities to move their elections to even years because their ballot cards are full. They don't have any room on their cards anymore. So it's gotten the most attention where it's controversial. I'm not aware of that being an issue here. One of the things is LA County has 88 cities in it, so their elections are a whole nother world. So some jurisdictions have done it. There's starting to be some research on it. One of the questions is you do get higher turnout in general, but you get a big drop-off. What we're finding at least in November elections is 20 to 30% of the people who vote for president or governor leave the city election blank. So we're just starting to get into that question. So you're still getting more voters.
That would be the work of the city to engage its residents in the ballot issues and the candidates, and the work of the community, right, to engage the voters to finish filling out their ballot. That might be a benefit of us being a smaller town, right? So thank you. And so, Mr. Kahlon, to change us to even years, that would be a charter change, correct?
That's correct.
And what about cumulative voting or runoff voting if after we have some public discussion, there's interest in those, would that have to go to a vote of the people as well?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Murillo, as we discussed back on May 29, any of those options would take a charter amendment.
Would not take a charter?
Would take a charter amendment.
Okay, thank you. And then
as well as I might add that the implementation process of a switch to district or other forms of elections would also take some thought. So it's not just one question. There are several subsidiary questions to look at.
And is that something that we can talk about in a community forum?
Of course.
I think what the mayor and I were sitting here talking about how when you were talking, Mr. Johnson, how layered everything really is, and how this issue is going to take discussion and thought and a clear head. And maybe some coffee and cookies, during our discussion. And I really appreciate your cheerfulness in this. I sit here grateful for that, because I don't appreciate being threatened with a lawsuit and looking at spending millions of dollars of the public treasury on an issue that as a city government we need to take step by step and engage the public. And I for one am supportive of continuing to hire you for your services, and you'd be great actually at one of the public forums because of your cheerfulness, and I'm not sure if you're too expensive for that. I'm not sure what these public forums would look like, but I really do appreciate your professionalism, and I would be willing to make a motion if after I hear from my colleagues.
Okay. Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Johnson, question for you again. If we go forward to increase the scope of the work you've done, Ms. Flax brought up a point about political party, and I know that's not really the intent or the scope of the law, but it seems like it may be a factor in the data. Is that something you harvest as well in this analysis?
It's not something we've gathered. It's something I guess we could look at. As she said, I think the community may know, and you all may know, kind of which faction or party people are from. In all likelihood, you can probably take what I'll present in my report and put it together that way, because we'll give you candidate by candidate breakouts of the vote, and you'll be able to see if in your head you have separate groupings, or if you want to tell me who the different groupings are. I'm happy to look at it in that way.
Well, it's just interesting right now. I mean, like you said, it's supposed to be a nonpartisan race, but as both national parties push towards the middle and try to attract protected groups into their camps, it's probably going to become more and more significant as we go along. So just curious if that was part of your breakdown or not.
Yeah, it isn't, because we're not looking at all at the reason. This is part of the issue of polarized voting, is we're not looking at what's driving the difference. We're simply looking for whether or not there is a difference. So
right, and then another part of the data, will our voter turnout percentage for elections based comparatively to other communities of this size, is that something that would come out in the data as well, or could do, not necessarily?
I mean, we could certainly do it. It would be separate. The analysis, the employers' voting analysis, would be entirely focused on your elections.
Right. I just wanted to comment, one of the speakers brought up was about voter turnout and whatnot, and we've actually had some voter turnout's abysmal across the scope of the country, and it just sometimes we're actually one of the better agencies, and that's not anything to brag about because it's not great, but still, just a thought in the scope of how as we go forward and try to make whatever the system is correct. I want to make sure we keep it all in perspective.
Well, and one thing to that comment and to the Mayor Pro Tem's comment, if you do a community forum, I would certainly invite the folks from City of Vista to come up and talk about what they did. They actually had a federal challenge around 2000, and that went away because of data. The challenge was flawed, but they formed a commission that looked at how do you encourage people to get on city commissions? How do you encourage people to run for office? All the things have been mentioned, and they actually had a Latino chairman of that commission who then used as a springboard to run for office and got elected to the council. So a lot of the side things you've been talking about encouraging participation, Vista has done quite successfully.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Maybe I missed, Mr. Johnson, maybe I missed Ms. Murillo. It was in Ms. Murillo's questions that where I'm going as well. The difference between odd and even year elections. How much has that been a topic in this debate conflict that's has unfolded over the years?
Yeah, it's recently been a big topic. The Santa Clarita cases, there's like 8 cases in the Santa Clarita area. This is a big focus. Older cases, it really wasn't an issue. In the Central Valley, we had very little of it. And it varies a lot county by county, because like in Orange County, everything is consolidated. There are no odd year elections. In LA County, as I said, they don't allow any more consolidated elections. So really county by county, it varies a lot. So determining on whether or not there's a case in one of these counties drives that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Hart?
Well, I want to echo my colleagues' compliments to you. I think you've done a fabulous job presenting this very complicated information. And the takeaway that I got that was probably most important for me is that, as you said, this is incredibly gray. And I think that everybody recognizes that. There are no facts that are black and white in this discussion. And I think one of the things that is uniquely complex for your next level of work is the fact that we have a mail ballot and we have consolidated precincts as a result of that. So the fine-grained detail that would be really, really helpful to answering some of the questions that you're going to be asking isn't going to be available because of the way the city has consolidated election precincts for these mail ballots. And so I'm sure you've spoken about that with our staff and considered that as one of the complexities going forward. What does that mean for your next level of analysis in our circumstances?
Well, the more data points I can get, the better. So the more precincts there are, the better. If I can get, especially in an even year election, if I can get separate results for the mail ballots from precinct versus the polling place ballots for precinct, that's more data points, and you get a more reliable answer. So it'll all depend on how many data points we can get. And it'll drive the reliability and the precision of the answer I'm able to give you.
Well, I guess the one good thing in that respect is that if you go back far enough, you will have both data sets. You will have fine-grained precinct data from older elections, and you'll have tremendously aggregated precinct data for the more recent elections. And I guess the differences between those two data sets will be interesting as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, and I think if you're going to look at, because you're right, the all vote by mail ballots is a different way than going to a polling place, although it'd be interesting to see the difference between people who actually handed in their ballot on election day. Because I think in the last couple elections, about a third of the turnout we had or more, or maybe a third of it, was people who waited until election day and they came to a place and handed it in. So waited for whatever reason. Who knows if that makes a difference or not, but there you have it. Mr. Hotchkiss, and then Ms. Murillo.
Go forward with this. What's your timeline to give us your report?
Part of it will depend how quickly we can get the precinct shape files and the precinct by precinct data into a database. Hopefully a few weeks. 3 or 4 weeks would be.
You could get it that fast to us?
Hopefully. It depends on the data availability and the ability to get that stuff into electronic form. But
Do we have any unusual challenges here that you've not encountered in the other work that you've done?
I won't know until I get into it. I haven't gotten into that level yet.
Thank you.
Do you want to make a motion?
I did, Madam Mayor. I would. I did, Madam Mayor. I would like to move that we engage Mr. Johnson's services further as we've been discussing.
Okay, is there a second? Okay. And good. Okay. And we all know what any other. Yes, Mr. White.
Well, I think, Madam Mayor, well, I certainly will support the motion, but we have received advice from our council as to how to proceed with it, and I think we should follow that guidance.
Yeah, I think the motion is pretty open-ended there, so for maximum flexibility. Great. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Great. All right, to be continued. Thank you. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. Okay, if we can move on to item number 10.
Municipal Code amendments for implementation of Senate Bill 2 related to emergency shelter zoning. Recommendation that Council B, introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only, either 1, an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara establishing regulations for emergency shelters as a permitted use in the R4, CP, CL, C1, C2, and CM zones, option 1, or 2, an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara establishing regulations for emergency shelters as a permitted use in the CM zone, option 2. This item was continued from July 15, 2014.
Thank you. Okay. Deja vu all over again. Here we are. Oh, but Mr. Hotchkiss, we have a full council, so that's good.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members. Last week, your council considered ordinance amendments that would allow the development of emergency shelters in multiple zones of the city where overnight accommodations are currently permitted. The council was mixed with respect to whether these emergency shelters should be allowed in multiple zones or whether a single zone should be designated to allow them. Several council members felt that the CM zone may be an appropriate zone. And based on your decision last week, or excuse me, your discussion last week, 2 draft ordinances are before you this afternoon. Option 1, which allows for the multiple zones, including the R4 and 5 commercial zones, and option 2, which allows for the CM zone. With respect to reference, this map shows the multiple zones, option 1, and also this area here in lavender or gray is the CM zone. And this is a enlarged map of the CM zone. Regardless of which option you choose this afternoon to introduce, development standards are proposed to help manage and regulate the uses to the extent that the law, state law provides. I do want to focus your attention on the parking standard. It has been revised to 1 vehicle space per 8 beds and 1 bicycle space per 4 beds. Last week, it was proposed to be 1 vehicle space per 10 beds. It will continue to have the flexibility of a parking study if the provider would like to provide fewer parking spaces than the rate requires. Staff's recommendation is that your council consider amendments to the municipal code with respect to option 1 and option 2, and to introduce an ordinance establishing regulations for either option 1 or 2. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. We do have some public comment speaker slips on this. So Jason Colbert and then Jose Arturo Ortiz de Martinez Gallegos. And there's 2 minutes up there. And
Hello, City Council, Madam Mayor. I think, there's a lot of people, I see a lot of RVs parked all over town, and there's a lot of good people that are, housingly challenged and a lot of bad ones. I think we should do something I mean, definitely help people that are less challenged if they want the help. But there's just way too many RVs just all over the place. I mean, do something. It's not good for the city. It's not good for the community. The police are very, very over. They get so many calls for homeless issues, stuff like that. The library, just numerous places. I would think more shelters might help for the people that want the help. The ones that don't want it, I mean, something has to be done because it's very, very, it's challenging for everybody. You know what I mean? The library, there's so many places that the homeless congregate at. I mean, people need to want to help themselves, you know. And we all know the economy's bad, but I mean, I think a lot of things need to be done because there's people they don't care. They're just drinking. They're doing drugs. A lot of them have mental problems. The police are overwhelmed with calls. You know, just a number of things. Like I said, I think more shelters would help for the people that want the help. Those that don't, they can go somewhere else. That's the way I look at it. You know, I mean, I think there's a lot that needs to be done. You know, thank you.
Thank you. Jose Arturo Ortiz, De Martin Gallegos, and Mr. Miranda, I see you in the back, so you're waiving your time, and so you have up to 4 minutes.
Thank you. I am a native, Santa Barbara native, worked here, went to school here, as I mentioned last year, October, and now I am homeless. I've been through Casa Esperanza, been through the rescue mission. I refuse to go to Salvation Army because I am not a drug addict, I'm not an alcoholic, and it seems it's catering to drug addicts and alcoholics. Putting up more shelters is going to create more problems. I'm totally against this. You're going to have more an influx of homeless people coming to Santa Barbara. It's bad enough as it is. Putting up more shelters is not going to work. It's not going to work whatsoever. I don't know if you've heard of Roseanne Haggerty, but she has started Common Ground in New York City. Works great. And if you could handle this to the council members and to the mayor, you'll find all this stuff that I've written down on Google. And this is what Roseanne Haggerty has said about shelters. This failed response to the needs of the most vulnerable homeless evolved into practice in part because homelessness was misdiagnosed as a monolithic condition with one-size-fits-all solutions. And that's what I said last year, October, when I said shut down Casa Esperanza, because it's a one-size-fits-all. Well, it doesn't work. Did not work for me. I didn't get the help that I needed the help. And no. It's the drug addicts and the alcoholics that get fast-tracked into housing. I am disabled. There's so many people in this town that are disabled. Senior citizens are disabled. We are not drug addicts. We are not alcoholics. It's a 10-year wait to get into housing. I crawl into a bottle of alcohol, have syringes hanging out of my arms. Sure, here comes the enablers, the nonprofit organizations. They're going to make money off of me if I go that route. But I'm not. I still sleep in the streets. Do I like it? No. Have I gotten used to it? Yes, but I don't like it. You know, and I have been told, no, you don't look homeless. You don't look homeless. By golly, you don't look homeless. Well, that's a stereotypical attitude. Not all homeless people are drug addicts, alcoholics, filthy, yelling and screaming up and down State Street and panhandling. Something has to be done to fix. Putting up more homeless shelters is just going to create more problems. And you're going to have more influx of people coming, not all over from the different parts of the country. I've met people from South Africa, from Russia, Serbia, Croatia, homeless from other countries. And I have met these individuals here. Why are they here? How do they get here? I don't know. Something needs to be done. So please, when you had a chance, look this stuff up on Google, because Common Ground in New York City works wonderful. Common Ground here in Santa Barbara, they're a joke. I mean, they're such a big joke, I can't even laugh about it. Well, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay, that concludes the public comment. Just to be clear, we're not approving a shelter. We are addressing a state mandate on zoning. So, Ms. Murillo?
I'd like to thank the speakers who came out. The gentleman who was discussing RVs has left. But for the record, I'm a member of the Milpas Action Task Force, and we talk a lot about the RVs in the Milpas corridor, and our staff and our police department are paying attention. To the last gentleman, we really cannot give up on C3H and Common Ground and all of the good programming that goes on here in the city of Santa Barbara. And definitely alcoholics and drug addicts do need support. And if they are trying to get sober, they need support and housing. And the broader discussion is the need for housing first, and you get the person into housing, and then you start to deal with their issues. And for a long time, it's been the other way. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a need for emergency homeless shelters. So in the spirit of wanting to cooperate with the state law, I'm standing my ground on my position from last week. I believe we should give the greatest opportunity to locate a shelter that may be needed in emergency situations. So I'd like to move for option 1 as we try to cooperate with Senate Bill 2.
There a second? Okay, that dies for a second.
Other people voted with me last week. No one?
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, the conversation was, I think, broad-ranged last week on this topic, and clearly the city has stepped up and continues to step up in providing homeless shelter services and for the region, and we do more than our fair share. And we also can comply with the state mandate by adopting B2 to allow shelters in the CM zone without discretionary review. And I would move that component of staff regulation, that is to say B2.
Second the motion.
Okay. Mr. Francisco?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to, partly in response to the comments today, and also just to make it clear to the public, I want to restate some of the things that I said last week, and that is that this law is a heavy-handed attempt by Sacramento to enforce their ideas about how each city should respond to homelessness. The city of Santa Barbara has, as was mentioned, we have Casa Esperanza, we have the Rescue Mission, we have Salvation Army, and we have a large number of other places like Transition House and others that offer shelter to people in various situations, far more than any other city in the county. So whether you agree with this law or not, it was definitely not designed to deal with Santa Barbara. It will not be applied in Santa Barbara. I can't imagine the circumstances under which that would happen given the large number of shelter beds already available. So again, I just want to say, regardless of whether we decide to put it in one zone or 10, we're not going to see any new shelters as a result of this.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, Ms. Murillo was right. I did vote for option 1 last time, and the reason was because I didn't feel that it was fair to all the people in the CM zone to be singled out as the only zone. And the other situation is that in this situation, people tend to have an out-of-sight, out-of-mind mentality about where shelters go and where they should be located, and I think that we should equally feel the pain. Now, given that, I didn't hear any feedback from anybody in any zone throughout this last period of time, which I'm kind of amazed by. I heard a lot of feedback about most issues most of the time. I did have a question, though, and maybe Mr. Vincent, I think you spoke to it last time, but the difference between a management plan and a CUP, is that a pretty gray area in terms of this non-CUP controlled shelter and a management plan that will be part of the new shelter coming forward?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, this ordinance would, either option does require a management plan. The management plan would be reviewed by the community development director to ensure that the certain elements are covered. However, unlike a conditional use permit, the existence of a management plan it would not be a condition of approval. The management plan would be in place. It would be up to the operator of the shelter to function in accordance with the management plan, but I don't see that as a condition of approval that would be enforced by the city after the fact that once it's in place.
So you're saying there'd be a management plan, but if it wasn't followed to the letter, we would not have any authority to correct the situation?
The ordinance does not provide a penal response to how the management plan is implemented. It does not have a provision that says thou shall comply with every letter of the management plan. It does specify the elements of the management plan and what would need to be presented to the community development director in advance, but we do not have built into the ordinance a penal or enforcement mechanism for the individual elements of the management plan.
And we couldn't create that within our own ordinance that would comply with state law?
The state law speaks to the allowance or the ability to require management plans and to require on-site management. It does not set it up in such a way that it would function like a conditional use permit. And I believe that if we set up a penal process that looked, as you mentioned, looks like a conditional use permit, my suspicion is that the Department of Housing and Community Development would not find this ordinance to be satisfactory and therefore would not certify our housing element.
I think you can see where I'm going with this. Where I'm basically thinking we have shelters that are functioning under CUPs currently, yet if there wasn't much difference, can you just rezone that and take away the CUP and create a management plan? That probably is not practicable, but I'm thinking, as my colleagues have said, we do over and above our fair share of what a community does, as it is anyway. The reality of creating the next shelter is probably not around the corner. But there's no real good answer to this. Yeah, and I think you might agree with that.
I think that was a rhetorical question.
Yeah, I think it's a rhetorical question.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm still, once again, I mean, to me, the CM zone is probably better than having all of those zones. The other side of the coin, is it really inherently fair to those who own property or businesses or reside next to the CM zone? And I can't see that. So, still struggling. Thank you.
Mr. Hotchkiss and then Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Regarding the plan, if in fact a place functioned outside the elements of, or I want to say, civil operation, and there were noise problems or other problems, those are enforceable in this case as they are in any case, are they not?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Hotchkiss, as we spoke last week on this topic, the penal statutes regarding nuisances and so forth would all still be in play.
Right.
And so if there were noise complaints or other sanitary issues and so forth, the building code would apply.
Right.
And so those kinds of nuisances would still be able to be addressed.
Right. I wanted people to understand that this was not just a free-for-all, that there were restrictions and conduct that had to be observed. Second question, R4. Describe to me R4 zone, please. Somebody. Irma?
Yes. Madam Mayor and Councilmember Hotchkiss, the R4 is the residential, it's a hotel, motel, and residential zone.
Okay.
Let me just show you the map. So it's basically the areas that are in this orange color.
Right.
The R4 zone.
Okay. Well, as I said before, and I will repeat now, I think it's best that we stay with where we stand now, which is that the CM zone is the sole area. I agree with Mr. Rouse, it's not perfect, but it's better than spreading this all over the city. And in any case, as Mr. Francisco points out, it's extremely unlikely that we will ever have to comply with this other than on paper. And if that gets our housing element going, fine. So that's why I'm going to support, as I did originally, the option 2.
Mr. Hart?
Well, I just think that Councilmember Rouse's questions there precisely define the difference. I think we need a conditional use permit as a mechanism to have the maximum flexibility to create a management plan that's enforceable. So to me, that makes the most sense, and I will be supporting the motion.
Okay. With that, we do have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed.
Okay. 6-1. Thank you. Okay. We can read item number 11.
Request from Mayor Schneider and Councilmember Murillo regarding 2020, a year without war proclamation.
Thank you. This is, as was said, a request from two of us, so I'll have very brief comments, and then Ms. Murillo, and then thank you for your patience. And you learned a lot about city government today, I guess, before we have you come up and give your brief presentation. This is a proclamation and an effort by a local group stemmed out of Santa Barbara City College, and so all things are local, as they say, and if we're looking at a whole year without war, we might as well start with the city of the group that initiated the program. Although we're not even first on the list, we have other cities who have already been ahead of us, as was in the staff packet, Lompoc and Carpinteria. So I just want to give time to the group here, Mr. White, Professor White, and others. Ms. Murillo, did you want to add anything?
Just briefly, Madam Mayor, that I really appreciate this campaign and to recognize that it is a worldwide movement. I understand there's 10,000 followers, and I'm saddened every day about the conflicts all over the world and praying for, peace in the Gaza Strip. And when you look at the Russian and Ukraine conflict, this does affect us. And this is a very small gesture on the part of the city of Santa Barbara to move forward the idea of a year without war. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
So in the spirit of thinking globally and acting locally, Dr. White, did you want to, I have 3 speaker slips, but I didn't know if you had a presentation, all 3 of you together, or just have, why don't you just come on up then and briefly describe what this is all about? Well, actually, we asked if you want to give a brief presentation, you can give a bit more than 2 minutes, sure.
Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, first of all, before I start all this, I want to thank all of you for this business that you've done today. I've been here for a couple hours, and I know I've been around a number of city councils. The city's business is sometimes mind-numbing, and somebody's got to do it. And thank you for being here in the afternoon and doing all of this. As mentioned, my name is Joe White. I'm a professor of philosophy, and I'm chair of the Department of Philosophy at Santa Barbara City College. I've also had the good fortune of working with a whole group of students at City College on this program called 2020, A Year Without War. Now, I'm not going to be presumptuous about ages here. I don't know if any of you remember the 60s. I don't know if you were old enough to be around in the 60s. But in the 60s, which I remember somewhat vividly, there were a whole lot of aspirations. As a matter of fact, we were asked to imagine a certain world, and all you need is love, and all we are asking, and all that. It was nice, dreamy stuff. And that has persisted at a certain level in our culture, but the millennials who've come with me, they'll tell you a little bit about their lives. What they've done with this program now, which is what I find so fascinating, is they've given all of that kind of dream and aspiration a deadline and a quantity. And what they're asking is something very simple. They're putting together a nonpartisan, non-religious, it's not a peace movement, it's not anti-military, you don't have to be a pacifist, it's a simple request. Can we get enough people on this earth, given the first time in human history we have the technology to do this, to say, stop it for 1 year, just 1 year? If you followed the International Olympic Committee, you know that since the 1990s, for every Olympics, they've gotten a unanimous vote at the United Nations for a 2-week truce during the Olympics. In 2001, there was a proclamation passed by the United Nations to recognize September 21st as an International Day of Peace. And as that worked its way by 2007, when things were so bad in Afghanistan, Stanley McChrystal and the head of the Taliban agreed that they would respect that day. And over 100,000 children received polio vaccines, and it's continued ever since. There's something in the air that we've discovered since we've started this program, and that is that human beings are now getting very war-weary, and we know by the economic analysis that winners no longer win. We know that from our own experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so what we put together is this very simple idea. Let's just try this for 1 year. Let's see if we can hit what social scientists sometimes call a tipping point. And we're looking at approximately 10% of the world's population, which puts us about where Facebook was in 2010, I think, getting about 800 million people dedicated and engaged in this program. And as was mentioned, we now have over 10,000 people following us. That has happened within 27 months. And with the amendment, or with the proclamation you see before us, we'll have to change it slightly because now we're in over 125 nations. We do have Lompoc and Carpinteria on board, but Santa Barbara is a global destination point. And this program will grow and succeed in terms of its feasibility because I've never spoken to a group that's not in favor of there being a year without war. Nobody's opposing that. The only problems that people have seem to be with the feasibility. Can this ever happen? And I hear things like, well, you're going to have a year without earthquakes. Well, it's not like that, you know. And if you think it's just a natural part of our human history, maybe think of it as smallpox. That's been a natural part of our human history, but we got away with it. We got rid of that. We no longer have smallpox. But the thing about war is it's a social phenomenon. It's not a natural phenomenon. It's a social phenomenon. If you come to our website, you can see some social science research that wars are really a byproduct of civilization. It's not part of our hunter-gatherer past. And as you know, we were like that for 190,000 years. So war is relatively recent to our history. War is always chosen. Wars now are typically chosen by groups. Even missiles shot at commercial airliners require groups of people to do that. What we want to do is see, can we take that choice off of the inevitable conflicts, as you see all day today here. People got conflicts. People have opinions. People are smart. People are informed. There are other methods of resolving these. We want humanity just to take an opportunity to say, there are other ways to resolve our inevitable conflicts. Let's think about this. We're looking for over 800 million people. That's our goal. We have a number of proclamations going before the United Nations. We have churches coming on board. We have a whole variety of other peace organizations coming on board. But we're about the only one that has a deadline. We're about the only one that has an expiration date. We're about the only ones that have quantifiable goals. And so if 2020 comes along and we only have, let's say, 200 million, maybe we only reach 25% of our bottom line, perhaps there's still goals. This organization will still be more popular than Oprah Winfrey, Barack Obama, and Miley Cyrus, throughout some celebrities, you know. And so I think that you can see this as a very first step in what actually started in the 19th century with the abolition movement for slavery. Slavery had been with humanity throughout its civilized history. Every civilization practiced slavery. And by the 19th century, human beings started saying, enough. We got to stop this. We're an abolition movement. We want to start this here. We want Santa Barbara to be at the head of this whole process, much like we oftentimes take a lot of we take credit for Earth Day, now a global program. We want 2020, a year without war, to grow out of this. And with your support, that will only add to the momentum as we move on to Goleta and Santa Maria and Sacramento and Washington and around the world. So I thank you for your time. We appreciate your support. And I'll ask Melissa to come up to give a few remarks.
Melissa
and Ben will
Johnston
come up.
and then Benjamin.
Yes, they're part of
Evenson.
the
Great.
student groups who've been working on this. So thank you so much. I'll answer any questions people
Great.
have.
Why don't we go through these two, and then we'll see if we have any questions. Ms. Johnston.
Hello. Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council, for having us here on the agenda and considering this item. I am a resident of Santa Barbara City. For the last 10 years, I'm a graduate of UCSB as well as Santa Barbara City College, and I'm here representing the millennials that Joe White has mentioned. Millennials there are about 600 million millennials on this earth. We are the most tech-savvy generation. We're cosmopolitan. We're the most educated, and we are very aware of these urgent global issues that we have on our hands. These environmental issues, this worry of global warming, of our depleting resources. And we look at the militaries of the world. The militaries of the world spend about $2 trillion annually on war, on killing each other, on further damaging the environment, and further depleting these scarce resources. If we even saw just 20% of this $1 trillion that we spend a year on war, it could substantially change our planet. It could help educate our future generations. It could be used to work towards a more sustainable future. So really, I'm here to say that it's time that we stop killing each other and using these resources to kill each other and further damage the world. And it's time that we come together to put a stop to war. Like Professor White said, there's been so many movements since the 60s working on achieving peace and anti-war movements, and we have a deadline. Let's do it for 1 year. Let's bring all these resources together. We're not anti-military. We'd love to see the militaries of the world come together, use their resources to clean up the world, to help get us out of these huge troubles that we're faced with. So with your support, we believe that it would be a huge step in achieving these goals, and we really would appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And here's Ben.
Come on up.
I'm Benjamin. I'm originally from Sweden, attending City College here. Thank you for having us, Madam Mayor and council members. So basically the reason why I'm here is to, I suppose, to represent the international aspect of this organization. And we're presently having satellites in Bali, Edinburgh, Stockholm, Sweden, Jordan, Oman, and it's growing. And we would like to have Santa Barbara as host city of this organization. I don't know if I have any further comments about it, but I would just appreciate that you have put this time to consider or put this item in to your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it's to the council. Any questions? Yes, Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you. Professor, that was great. I liked your presentation. It was very helpful to me. Help me get over a couple of things. Can you make this proclamation or your efforts work towards our own homegrown warfare, as in gang warfare?
Well, one of our goals is to keep this as simple as possible. Is to keep our program as simple as possible. We're not dealing with criminal behavior, and personally, I think as people will just live with criminal behavior. That's a whole different issue. I think oftentimes, and when you study the history of war, you see that groups of people come together and intentionally set out to do something in groups, which is what we want to deal with, is this kind of group violent behavior to resolve these inevitable conflicts that we have. So we want to stay away from criminal behavior, and we certainly don't want to be opposed to the war on poverty. But we think there's an intuition that everybody has about when wars occur. And with the sweep of history, we see that if we go back 300 years in Europe, most of those countries were at war with each other. It's almost unthinkable that Spain's going to invade Belgium or that England's going to again invade France. The sweep of history, and if you follow some of the research that we bring up on our website, the fellow at Harvard University by the name of Steven Pinker thinks we're living in one of the most peaceful times in the last 8,000 years. There's a kind of tendency toward finding other means of conflict resolution short of having to just kill each other in groups. And that's the process that we're aimed at. So gang warfare, it's all bad. We have presently developed a program that we piloted in Lompoc 2 weeks ago in the Lompoc School District, where we brought together the Boys and Girls Club, the Rotary gave us a grant, an anti-bullying program, and the Year Without War curriculum that oftentimes war is just adult bullying. And this is geared toward 12-year-olds. So we had the entire Lompoc district on board. The program went wonderfully. We're talking to Rotary now about replicating this in other places, where we talk to kids at this age who will be able to vote in 2020 and saying, look, there are other means of conflict resolution short of having to harm each other or bully each other. So that's probably as close as we will get to dealing with all of that specificity in terms of, say, criminal behavior. Because our goal at this point is we have so many faith-based communities. I hope to be in the Vatican next year at this time, asking Francis to help us. We had an emissary a week and a half ago in India represent us to the Dalai Lama, and we're still waiting to hear what's going to happen with that. So we're looking to bring together a global community in a social experiment that's never been tried before. What happens when, 10% of the world's population, and if you look at the statistics on the number of refugees compared to combatants in war areas, there are always more refugees than there are combatants. We just want to give voice to the people. And if the people, and if this thing goes up to 2 or 3 billion people, I think we win the game. And then war becomes like slavery, a criminal behavior. And we know right now there's still 20 million slaves on Earth, but it's criminal everywhere. Let's make war criminal. Let's follow the abolition movement.
In doing a little due diligence, I just thought I should sort of look through what you all had sent us. Thank you very much. And a couple of the groups that you had got on board were really kind of anti-U.S., and even one was decrying the 4th of July. Well, if anybody saw me dressed up in the parade, they would know I couldn't agree with that. So help me get over that. How do we get beyond that?
Which groups were?
Vietnam Veterans for Peace.
Oh. Well, that's an annoyed group, And again,
that's a good way of saying it.
Well, they are, and there are people who've been in battle and have done terrible things themselves, and life is no longer good, and they want this to stop. And we're hoping that our tent is big enough. And if you see the people, for example, Benjamin here has never had a philosophy class. So don't think that these are all philosophy students or social science students. We're trying to model what we would like to see on the planet. Namely, let's respect the diversity, but let's not elevate it to the point where we have to take each other's lives. So Veterans for Peace, so far, I don't think they've seriously harmed anyone, but they do have very strong opinions.
Right.
And because of their own history, I deeply respect, because I've never been in battle. I've never been in them.
Well, I'm a veteran, too, and I came out with a different viewpoint. But in any case, in supporting your idea, which I will, I just want to be clear that when I take the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of every council, it's serious and meaningful.
Yeah, and as I said, we're trying to model a tent that can show that everybody can come together here, and we can take this off. And as Melissa pointed out, there's a potential peace dividend, which is a phrase that was popularized by George W. Bush and Margaret Thatcher in the early 90s at the end of the Cold War, to say, what will countries benefit from when their militaries finally shrink? And our military shrank consistently for a decade until 2001.
Thank you. Ms. Murillo?
Thank you. Councilmember Hotchkiss, was that a motion from you? Sure. Okay, and I'd like to second it then.
Okay, I think the motion is there's a draft proclamation, and I think we heard from the public hearing the testimony that instead of 90 countries, there was over 125 countries, so if we could be accurate with that. To the motion, Mr. Francisco?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have absolutely no doubt about the good intentions of the people who are behind this and the good intentions of the cities of Lompoc and Carpinteria. It's interesting, we don't get to talk very often anymore about the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which is mentioned in the Lompoc proclamation, and that, as some of you may recall, was a pact that was signed in 1928 by all of the major powers and a lot of the minor powers to renounce the use of war as a method of settling international disputes. And clearly that didn't work out too well. I don't think that the city of Santa Barbara is in danger of going to war with anybody. And I have no doubts whatsoever about the good intentions of all the people who are involved with this. I think it's outside the scope of city government. And so I can't support the motion for that reason. I can think of any number of very good intentioned things that we could put forth as a council, and I will restrict myself to the more mundane issues, which I think are actually within the jurisdiction of the city. Thank you.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, not to be a wet blanket, but I do support the efforts of this, and certainly nobody would vote for war. But once again, I with all due respect to my colleagues, as we go forward, and I remember in councils past when resolutions were taken on global matters, and really I don't think the United Nations is holding up a vote to wait to see how Santa Barbara City Council is going to weigh in on it. I have no problem with the proclamation. I have no problem voting for the proclamation. But I sure don't want to go down the path of talking about whaling in Norway or pollution of the Yangtze River, which any group could come by. I mean, you guys are doing legitimate work and good work and using social media to do that, and I appreciate that. What I don't want to do is bring up everything that comes by. There's a lot of problems in the world. There's a lot of issues in the world going on right now. And are we going to go through this every time? I would like to see this kind of be it. I don't want to vote for political issues outside of the city council, nor do I want to vote for social or global issues outside of city councils. We fix the potholes, we go home, and that's really, I believe, where we should be. Thank you.
Mr. Hart?
Well, I'm an enthusiastic supporter of this effort. I think it's a great thing. I appreciate you being here. I particularly liked the presentation. I thought you were very thoughtful about these issues and the role that the city can play in being a leader and trying to support your efforts, and I'm completely in support of the motion.
Great. Thank you all for your presentation. Good luck in your efforts. And we'll know, like you said, there's a deadline. So, and it's even just getting, like you said, to 200 million people of the world or whatever, it would be a great feat, and it started here in Santa Barbara. So, okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay, I think that's a 6-1. Thank you very much. Okay, so item number 12.
Appointment of ad hoc city administrator recruitment committee.
So I guess I'll just take over here, or because it's from me and the Mayor Pro Tem. Just in terms of the upcoming retirement of Mr. Armstrong as the city administrator, and we'll have plenty of fun and games about that at another time. But we have to get a process together to find his successor. And I think the last time when we were actually looking for the city attorney process, we had a ad hoc committee of 3 just to at least get the logistics together, and then obviously all 7 of us would be very much involved in the full recruitment process, however that may take shape. So if we could appoint that ad hoc committee, I know Mayor Pro Tem Murillo has expressed interest. I would like to be part of that, but we'll see what other interest there is. I see some lights on from Mr. Hart and Mr. Francisco and Mr. White. We'll go in that order.
Well, Madam Mayor, I would volunteer my services. I was on the council when Mr. Armstrong was hired the first time, and be welcome to provide any additional assistance in the process going forward at this time.
Mr. Francisco?
And I was on the council when we recruited our city attorney, and I think that the combination of myself, yourself, Madam Mayor, and Councilmember White did an excellent job very recently on this, and I think that we would be a good team, and everyone on board would be satisfied with the results. Thank you.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, it's definitely, even in our campaigning, it was an issue that I raised then of saying I thought that Mr. Armstrong's time might be coming nigh, and that this is one area where I hope that I could participate, as well as we've brought on quite a bit of new management to the city this last couple of years, and that I would love to also participate in this. So
getting into quorum territory. Okay. Mr.
Well, obviously we have more
Hotchkiss?
people who'd like to do it than there are spots.
Madam Mayor, I was going to support what we did before. It was so successful. That is the existing group, or the pre-existing group of yourself, Mr. White, and Mr. Francisco, to form this committee.
Okay.
I make that motion, if I may.
There's a motion. Is there a second? I'll second that. Okay, Ms. Murillo?
The motion is for the mayor, Francisco, and White.
Right. We're right.
Because you're the committee that hired Mr. Kalan, or started the process, sort of.
Started the process. Didn't hire him. Started the process.
And to be clear, this ad hoc committee, I think, is going to do basic logistical just things about, do we want to talk to certain search firms to come in to do the process. The full decision will be all 7 council members. So none of the decisions will be made just by 3 of us.
Okay, well, I would like to advocate for a community workshop. I'm a big advocate for having the public involved, and we could describe for the public what the city administrator does. You know, not everybody pays attention as closely as the 3 members in the audience right now at the end of a long day. And then we can ask the public, what do you want in a city administrator? What do you want in someone who has so much to do with the leadership and operation of our city? So that's my first comment. I would be happy with the motion as long as there's gender balance, and the mayor would provide that. And then my last comment would be, when Steve Wiley announced that he was retiring, I was all nervous. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's been here forever. And I asked Jim Armstrong, I said, you know, what are we going to do? He's leaving. He has all this memory. And Mr. Armstrong, you said that, well, in your experience, everybody gets nervous when somebody leaves, but usually what happens is you end up hiring somebody better. So we're really happy with Mr. Kwan. But so maybe we're going to find somebody better than you. And I only say that as a way to make us feel better, because I'm surely going to miss you. And I know you're here for a couple of more months, but I feel safe with you, you know, as in your position, and I want to find somebody that I can trust like that and know and have faith in. So and I hope you took that the right way.
Please don't take that quote out of context.
Mr. Armstrong wouldn't pass your gender requirement, though, you know.
There we go.
I think that's important too.
Yeah, no, we have a motion for myself, council members White and Francisco, and we'll figure out and thank you for the feedback of the community discussion. We can bring that up as part of our discussion as well. I think, is that your light still on? Are you ready to vote, or did you have something? Okay.
I'm going to vote for the motion.
Okay. So all in favor? Aye. Okay, that passes. Thank you. All right. Any council member committee assignment reports? Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Planning Commission met last week and had two items of note. The giraffes are getting a shelter, sort of a pole barn. Was approved, and with some substantial drainage improvements, which will be sort of help the runoff in that area. So that was the easy one. The tough one was a little condo project at 240 West Alomar that have 2 modifications associated with it. No, just one setback modification. But that ended up passing on a 3-2 vote. That property has just been the subject of controversy as it's tried to get developed over the last 5-6 years. But anyway, a squeaker vote on a small condo project.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Madam Mayor, I want to apologize for missing the meeting last week, and I returned to the council today one appendix lighter. Came out of nowhere. I had no idea at my age you could get appendicitis, but be aware you can, and it hurts like hell. So it's nice to be back, and thank you very much for welcoming me.
Glad you're back so quickly. Mr. Rouse.
Thank Mr. Hotchkiss for the emergency room report, and we also met with the Downtown Parking Committee and spoke about our Dakota Communal Lot revenue equipment going forward, and also about the occupancies up in Lot 4 and 5 near the Victoria, where there's a lot of activity, and how as we decompress from all the construction and trying to get people's habits to go and maybe explore Lot 6 as parking as opposed to the neighborhoods and or those 2 lots which are already over impacted. So, and of course we still speak lovingly about the Louise Lowry lot and how that may someday come to fruition, but nobody's quite sure just yet. Thank you.
Ms. Murillo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Both of my reports relate to reducing youth violence in our city. The pro-youth movement had a meeting on Saturday, and we looked at domestic violence, family violence, sexual violence, and how it all influences teens, and sometimes they end up committing gang violence. And it's the first of 4 workshops in a series, so we'll do that every month. And then I attended the gang task force along with you last week, and we heard presentations about restorative justice in the schools. Our own Sergeant Lorenzo Duarte represented the police department well and gave a report on their operations. And then we heard from Project Heroes, or Proyecto Héroes, and it's a project that is reducing violence in the Latino community, and it's CALM, and some representatives from UCSB. So that was a really productive meeting. If you wanted to add anything, that's all I could remember from that particular meeting. Thank you.
No, it was good, and also I think Saul Serrano has up on the website on their newsletter details about the meeting. It's on the Community Action Commission website if anyone's interested. Mr. Hart?
Along with Mayor Schneider, I attended Sherry Fisher, the general manager for the Santa Barbara MTD's retirement party. That was a really great occasion, celebrating her 40 years of service to the district and the community. Lots of people making very heartfelt comments about her very proactive way of working with other agencies and really putting MTD in a great position in the community. I also attended, as the council liaison, the Beacon meeting this past Friday, talking about beach erosion and nourishment projects. There's a new intern that is going to be volunteering her time as a grad student working with Beacon, so they have great hopes for an additional level of effort with the community. And then also with Mayor Schneider yesterday, I attended the Isla Vista Governance Town Hall meeting. There's a kind of a grassroots effort underway to talk about issues in Isla Vista, potential new governance scenarios. And what particularly appealed to me was that when I was in college at UCSB, I was actually a member of the Isla Vista Community Council. It's the first public office that I held. And so I wish nothing but the best for the Isla Vista community. There's a lot of energy and enthusiasm and creativity out there. And I think that by talking about these issues together, they can make a lot of strides in a positive direction.
You still have videotapes of those meetings? That might be fun to watch. Anyway, well, people mentioned all the things I was at this past week. So they must have had a camera, something. We do have some closed sessions. We're not doing item 13, if you could read the other 2.
Item 14, conference with city attorney, anticipated litigation. And item 15, conference with city attorney, existing litigation. The existing litigation cases are described in the agenda.
Thank you. And for the record, I will have to recuse myself from item 14 due to a potential conflict with the Political Reform Act. And we will adjourn from closed session. I'd like to adjourn in the honor and memory of Ralph Fertig. Just having the new bicycle master plan process just get started, I think if we can keep his thoughts in mind as we move forward, and as well as reaching out to the community, I think that was his expertise of being everywhere and knowing all the details about how government works or doesn't in some cases, but he will surely be missed. So, okay, thank you very much.